So that was a really wonderful series of three talks to get us started today. So let's indeed try to start talking to each other now on these topics. And does anybody in the panel wish to begin? Questions? Okay, let me start then. And so one of the things we learned, James Serpell, is that most cats' homes are multi-cat homes. Do you know, is there any data yet on whether or not cat welfare is better or worse or impacted by that difference? Are single-housed cats better off or worse off? Or is there any information that any of us have on that?
I don't know of any. I can't put my hands on any scientific evidence at the moment, or can't bring to mind any, but.
One can imagine.
Certainly, the sort of the general perception is that cats are more sociable than people give them credit for, and that as long as the two cats you have are comfortable in each other's company, then they probably are happier.
They may be happier, but counterintuitive in a way. If you in the zoo world, we're trying to maximize animal welfare, and one of the rules is, make the captive environment as close to natural as possible. And if cats by nature live alone, or at least by nature live alone most of the time, naively you might think that a cat would be inclined to be happier when alone.
Well, it works by people like David MacDonald. Early studies of cat ecology suggested that really they're more flexible than that. So they can form groups when the food is clumped, when the food source is clumped, and if the food source is very dispersed, they're equally comfortable living solitarily. So I think cats are quite flexible. They can adapt to various different living.
That's one of the lessons that Malini Suchek mentioned yesterday, is that they're maybe more social than we give them credit for. But in any event, it seems like, I'm sorry.
Well,
please.
The clinical data is that the more cats you have, the more problems you have, as far as behavior problems are concerned. If you have one cat, you have virtually no problems. If you have two cats, you have twice as many problems. If you have three cats, you have 4 times more problems. That it tends to be.
Are you referring to behavioral or medical?
Behavioral problems.
So you're implying that maybe a single cat is welfare may.
Yes, and I know people are going to throw rotten tomatoes at me.
Well, it sounds like there's a need for a study here. It sounds like there's need for data. We of course have to work hard to define cat welfare and assess it in some reasonable way. Jerry Zazula.
The cats may appear to get along, but it kind of depends on the environment that they're in. That I have found that when I have more than one cat, they get along for certain things, but at certain times of the day they want to be alone. They exchange territories within the house, and right now I have 2 grand kitties that I inherited from my son, who had to move across the country, and he had them in a small apartment where they couldn't get away from each other, and there were more behavior problems that developed into health problems because they couldn't share that territory the way they wanted to. I've got them now, the house is bigger, they're happy, we've adjusted all of that, but I had to make a lot of environmental changes to make that happen.
You do hear a lot of reports of, people have, say, 2 cats and then one cat dies. And you then get a personality change in the surviving cat. It suddenly becomes extrovert and friendly, whereas previously it had been very shy and retiring. And that suggests that it was being kept in a sort of subordinate position by the other cat.
That his true self emerges when he's
right.
Disinhibited. We often divide the animal lovers into dogs and cat people, but I think we're dividing ourselves now into single cat and multi-cat people. So, but the academic in me is now making mental notes like crazy. We have a clear need for data here, and interesting question. James Serpell, you also touched on the male-female differences, meaning male humans versus female humans. Is there in fact data on that? Is that already well known? Is there in fact a female cat connection that's greater than man-cat connection? That's distinct from just animals in general?
Yeah, there is some data, both on children and adults. Among children, female children express, interest in cats more often than male children, and also would like to be a cat more than a male child. You asked them that question. What animal would you like to be? Female children are more likely to choose cats. And in terms of, ownership of cats, traditionally women were more likely to be owners of cats than men. But I think that's shifting. I think that's changing. I haven't seen any studies very recently that have looked at that. So it'd be another interesting thing to take another look at.
Good. I'm delighted to hear that as well. And by the way, I'm only trying to prime the pump with questions. And if anybody else has a question, Jane Scarlett.
For James, you were talking about the theory that we had animal keeping and then it moved into animal breeding. And you mentioned that the animals tended to be, if anything, a little bit smaller in the animal keeping stage. And I found that interesting because one might suggest that they would be larger because they now have a more steady food source. And if you're not selecting yet, you're not breeding yet for a smaller animal to be in the human household, it sort of struck me as being not expected, just that they might be smaller before you get to the breeding stage, before you're actually actively selecting, because you now have this more steady food source. And I wondered if there's anyone who has thought about that and why that might be.
Usually the interpretation is you may have a more steady food source, but it's of poorer quality because you're basically living off whatever humans give you. And that's kind of maybe low quality food. Actually, there's a study coming out soon that shows there's actually been a genetic change in dogs towards being able to tolerate relatively high carbohydrate diets compared with their wild ancestors. So again, that suggests that early dogs had to adapt to maybe a more accessible food source, but much lower quality. So maybe the size decrease reflects that.
Kathy Michalinski.
Thanks. I think Dr. Zazula raised many important questions on this topic, and one of the questions that she raised was the issue of fee waived versus fee adoptions for cats. And I just wanted to share with the panel that there has been a study done about this, and I find it really interesting that somebody did a study about it, and it was done by Dr. Emily Weiss. It's published in the Journal of Applied Animal Welfare Science. And it looked at the attachment levels of adopters at the time of their adoption, and then approximately 7 months later via email, and they used an attachment scale. And they found that the attachment of cats was not decreased after adoption when fees were waived. That free adult cat adoptions could dramatically increase the number of cats that are moving through our shelters into homes. And in areas in the country where the choices are either that cat's going to sit in the shelter for a longer period of time and be exposed to infectious diseases such as respiratory tract illness, or have the potential to be euthanized, that might be a really good method to move our cats out of shelters and into homes. And it's good to have the science behind it to back up that.
Sure. Barbara Carr.
When we went to fee-waived adoptions at our organization, the SPCA, serving Erie County, in the very first year, we saved 6,000 care days for cats. So that just backs up what Kathy is saying. That's a lot of care days, which means that we're moving cats through quicker and they're less likely to get disease. So
What kind of fees are we talking about?
Adoption
What's the number in dollars? What is a normal cost of a fee?
I think a kitten is $125 and a cat is $85. So anything over 3 years of age is always, we don't fee waive on occasion. We have no fee for any cat over the age of 3, and we generally extend that to any cat over 1, probably 6 months out of the year.
But by implication, the $85 to $100 is a financial impediment to discourages the adopter.
I think the best word for advertising in the world is free. If you want to move any product, free moves it.
To add to that information, not only about attachment, but also by return rates, there's been at least one study that's demonstrated that the cat that's acquired for free or two for the price of one, in fact, is not more likely to be returned than the cat that you actually pay for.
Right.
So if you're talking about valuing, not only in terms of attachment, but also whether they're more likely to bring it back because they don't really value it as much as one they've paid for. It does not seem to be any data to support that.
Well, and there are studies going back quite a little ways that show that most people who have a cat, who are attached to a cat, had no intention of getting the cat. If everybody in the audience would raise their hand if they have a cat in their household they had no intention of getting, okay, you know, and this is, it's pretty
Just for the
clear.
record, the entire audience raised their hand.
Right. 67% of cats in households, there was no thought about getting that cat. It just happened. It got it from your son moving across the country or a stray in your neighborhood. So how you acquire the cat, you really, I think, is important to all of us in how we find homes for cats. And if we get it in our head, the cats are much more likely to stay in their homes if there's no thought about getting them. Okay, then we want to capitalize on that in every way that we can. And there's an old study about 25 years old that does indeed show the cats given as gifts, acquired as strays, are less likely to be relinquished to an animal shelter than a cat who acquiring that cat is planned. So the less thought put into getting a cat, the better off that cat's chances are of staying in the home.
This it allows an interesting segue to a question that I also had. It has to also do with finances. Jerry Zazula mentioned that more money is actually spent on dogs, even though we actually have now more cats, and implied that they were second-class citizens, in your words. But that need not be the case. Let me ask you all, cat owners and veterinarians, are cats less expensive in terms of their needs? Maybe their care is less expensive. Maybe their food is less expensive. We may spend less on cats simply because they're less expensive creatures. Is there an answer to that, anyone? Oh, my.
My cat food is much less expensive than my dog food.
Yep, please.
Well, I think too.
Miranda Workman.
Thank you. I think too we have to look at what we're looking at when we start talking about equipment with dogs. We're talking about leashes, collars, training equipment, training classes. You know, we're starting to really get into, there's a lot more maintenance, if you want to look at it that way, required, and a lot more tools required to maintain a dog than you would a cat, which could also account for some of that difference.
So we need not conclude that yet that they're second class. Great.
Can I address the stray cat issue too?
Yes, please.
You would ask why only 2% of cats are reclaimed from shelters, and I've really looked at that quite a little bit. And for one thing, those people who lose a cat generally think it's going to come home, okay? And so they don't even begin their search until shelters have already held the cat stray time. And I've looked at people coming to look for their cats, and I've looked at people bringing in stray cats, and they're sort of diametrically opposed. People don't even start looking for their cat for 7 to 10 days, okay? And people don't bring in a cat for about 30 days after seeing it in their community, unless it has a collar on it. And so they see a stray cat and they don't really pick it up or bring it to an animal shelter until the weather changes dramatically or until the cat is injured, okay? And so those are the big times that animals would be brought in, not simply because they're seen. So the people who have lost a cat don't look for the cat until after the cat, they look for the cat before the cat would ever be in the shelter. That's one thing. There's a whole bunch of other things, but that's the biggie to me.
Well, just to add to that, because I think it's really important for us and people in the audience, is that we are less likely to put identification on our cats than we do our dogs. And of course, the shelters are using microchips, but again, if you find a cat on the weekend or whatever, it is a lot easier to return a dog or a cat that has a visible collar on it with identification on it than it is to, even if they have a microchip, to be able to get it to somebody, whether that be a veterinarian or back to the shelter, to to be scanned and to see that identification. The other thing is there's some very interesting work that Linda Lord did that demonstrates many of us have and I was included in that, have this fear that if we put a collar on a cat with a tag, that cat's going to get hung up somewhere, especially if it is indoor-outdoor cat. And her data would suggest that it's very, very rare occurrence that a cat get hung up somewhere with that collar on, and that the probability that it gets into a shelter and gets euthanized there is probably far higher than that cat hanging itself somewhere. And so we really need to, both from the veterinary standpoint and from the shelter standpoint, to push that cats wear collars and that they have identification on their collars such that if they do end up in a shelter or somebody finds them in the neighborhood, that they can be returned promptly to their owners.
But in Linda Lord's research, she also shows that if a cat is not brought into a shelter, it's 13% more likely to get home than if it is brought into a shelter. So we're really looking at our approach to stray cats quite a bit differently, because if they're better off on the street to get home, why in heaven's name are we bringing them into the shelter? It just doesn't make any sense. And on our own, we've had to have stray cat waiting lists from time to time, and when we recheck on those cats, we find that the majority, not the majority, but many, many more are going home than the cats we have.
Warren Johnson has a question.
Sure. I'd like to revisit what I've heard in multiple ways, really, that the difference, say, between dogs and cats in learning ability, or sometimes it's expressed in terms of training them, or the social cues. And I'm curious, we don't talk a lot about training cats, although I think it's, all of us do it without even knowing it in many ways. But but perhaps we're not communicating in quite the right way with our cats. Or I'd like to hear some discussion about that cognitive difference, perhaps.
Well, just to start, what I was really disappointed in is I've studied mostly dog behavior and cognition, and the fact that there's such little work done on cat cognition and how they're perceiving all these cues. I tried to summarize about 70 studies in dog pointing gestures. We've done that on so many different levels, and with cats, there's this one little study. So I think that there's a large deficit in the area of cat cognition, and so I'm putting a lot of it into learning during their individual lifestyles or lifetime, and I was interested that this pointing gesture that they were attending to with food. So the question is, we see on YouTube all of these cat agility videos and things like that. What cues, or visual or vocal, are they attending to with humans?
Miranda Workman.
Yeah, I think that some of that has to do with our relationship. One, we tend to have a dog, or some of us have more, but we tend to spend more time on that relationship. We use resources very differently with dogs than we do with cats. Cats tend to have free access to every resource that they really want. So anything we would use as a reinforcer with a cat when it comes to training often is devalued because it's freely accessible. When you start changing that relationship and changing that paradigm, which I train cats a lot, then you start to see that you do become an important resource in that relationship, and then you can start from there to start doing more training, which is something we naturally do with dogs. Because of our working relationships we've had for so long, we're just starting to embark on that with cats, I think.
Someone over here had a question? Yes, Marsha Levine.
I was just going to mention, returning to the item of whether cats are less expensive to keep than dogs, one of the big issues is that cats are really known for hiding their illnesses, and this is one of the reasons why cats are frequently not brought into a veterinary hospital until disease is very, very advanced. And so I think that the importance of regular examinations is really crucial with cats, but I think that contributes to it. The other factor, of course, as Barbara Carr mentioned, is that they're smaller, and so they're less expensive to feed, and their medications are certainly less costly than, I often I often comment with some of the more costly medications that we should be very grateful we're not treating a Great Dane. And so I think that there's a huge difference there, and those are two reasons why those numbers don't add up. And they're also, as a third item, they're not as demanding of toys. They don't destroy their toys as quickly as dogs. So there are a lot of reasons why I know I'm constantly supplying dog toys for my granddogs, and it's just there's just a huge difference in that factor as well.
Okay, let me pose the next question. Jerry Zazula mentioned that there were, implied anyway, that there was data suggesting that there are more problems with indoor-only cats than with indoor-outdoor or just outdoor, even though the indoor-only cats lived longer. In your review, the indoor cats had longer lifespans, so that implies by itself better welfare. But you also implied that there were greater problems, health problems, did you not? And that suggested, or you seem to be suggesting, that allowing a cat outdoor access is something that's recommended by your, but it seemed implied by your comments. Were you in fact implying that?
That's a debate that's going on right
Well,
now.
let's get an answer. We have a bunch of experts assembled.
And obviously, the longer an animal lives, the more likely it's going to acquire a disease. So, that doesn't necessarily mean...
Right. If it's simply that indoor cats live longer and consequently they have greater geriatric diseases, then there's no big surprise.
Part of what I was inferring is that some cat owners, because they feel that cats are less expensive to keep, are very shocked by the costs to keep an older cat with these chronic diseases. The cat has been maintenance-free for 10, 12 years, and then all of a sudden it becomes very, very expensive to keep that cat.
But part of the issue is that the higher mortality rates in outdoor cats, or cats that go outdoors, is due to accidents, predominantly car accidents. They get hit by cars. And in the UK, where most cats are indoor or outdoor cats, the number one cause of cat death and injury is they get hit by a car. And if you keep your cat indoors, it's not exposed to that. And so that's going to dramatically increase its lifespan. But it's kind of an artifact of a very high level of accidents in outdoor cats if they live in an urban area.
Well, Jerry's number one question was, how can we maximize the quality of life for cats? And one of the first questions that stemmed from your presentation was, is allowing them outdoors access an important component of that? Does anybody want to vote on that question itself? Jane Scarlett.
I don't know the answer exactly, but I do know that I am wondering, most of the humane organizations are advocating for indoor cats for that reason, that there are less risks outdoors. But on the other hand, we're seeing probably 10 years ago, 25% of cats were overweight. That has grown to something like 33% of cats being overweight. And, in the shelter, I work in the shelter arena, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the welfare issues of maintaining good welfare in the shelter. But what about the welfare of some of our owned cats? Are they in enriched environments in their homes? Their owners often are spending 12 hours a day away from their cats. How much, you mentioned that we probably spend more time with our dogs than we do with our cats, and I think that's probably true. We know that obesity leads to diabetes in cats as well as in people. We know we see more osteoarthritis in those cats. And in some ways, are we killing our cats with kindness, in a sense? And what is the quality of life? Are they able to express their natural behaviors in a small apartment where some human is gone for a long period of time, where another cat may or may not be a plus to their environment? And I don't know the answer to that question, but I know I certainly worry about it, and I wish there were more research on that we assume that they're in a loving home and therefore their welfare is good. But is that always the case? I don't know the answer to that.
Marsha Levine.
I think a lot of this really depends on the individual cat. I don't think you can make a blanket statement across the board, but I've also noticed that there's a huge difference in where their earliest start was. If they were born in a household, I think they're more likely to adapt to that. I think cats that were born outside in barns or whatever and then brought in the household, it seems that sometimes even years later, this part of their brain wakes up to that early experience, and those cats appear to need to go outdoors more than some others.
Now, and by the way, I also want to comment, I can anticipate where Wayne may be going here, but just a moment, Wayne. I also want to comment that an underlying theme on this symposium and in our efforts in general is to increasingly become better and better responsible pet owners. And there is a huge ecological implication when we allow cats outdoors. In fact, if you go to our own Ishar website, you'll see an editorial, a video that we produced that says, control your cats because of the impact they're going to have on wildlife. And we're going to hear from Wayne Pacelle later today on that very topic. Wayne Pacelle.
Yeah, I am going to address that topic, but did want to just reply to your question. I think any of us who've had cats, especially cats who were outside before and then we attempt to keep them inside, I mean, it seems common sense that they're much more stimulated by the outdoor experience, outdoor and indoor experience. And obviously, you know, more movement means more exercise. And as James said, it's not just automobiles, it's predators and it's disease and lots of other things. I mean, you know, more chances for people to be cruel to cats, especially if they think they're unowned. So I think it's an issue of trade-offs. I mean, you are definitely sacrificing the freedom of cats because the risks are so serious outside for them, and then you have all of these other collateral impacts. And I think that's where the animal protection movement generally, although there's varying views about this, takes a cats indoors approach in general. I mean, we have taken that at HSUS and have a Safe Cats program, which I was going to talk about for just a few moments when I get up at the lectern.
Very good. Now, I thought one of Jerry Zazula's questions also should resonate throughout the symposium. Let's start this now. What human need is fulfilled by cats? I think probably we all have a sense of that, but it might be useful for somebody to say it out loud, or what human needs are fulfilled by cats. James Serpell, when you started talking about the domestication of cats, you very conservatively discussed the data and the facts, and pointed out that we really can't go back in time and see the actual events. We have to guess about it. But do you have a guess about that? Do you think cats came into our lives primarily out of utility first, or out of affection first? Are they presently now mostly because of this? Are they our surrogate children? What human needs are met by cats?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on the line of saying many times that I think the human propensity to keep animals as pets was the source of many of our domestic animals, ultimately. Sure, we recognized other benefits from having them.
And by that, the tapping our tendency to allo mother.
Yes, exactly that. And, I like to call pets non-human social support providers. Because that's essentially the role they're playing. And we know that social support is enormously important to human health and welfare. We know it. People who lack it are much more vulnerable to all kinds of medical problems and psychological problems. So we know that people need that. And I think they use pets to augment it. So it's another form of social support that we exploit. And I think that's something that humans have found rewarding since long before any kind of written history.
Yeah.
And I think it was the primary motivator for bringing these animals out of the wild environment and into the human social environment. Whether they stayed there or not, I think then depended on maybe other things they contributed.
People these days are talking about dog evolution as possibly not having been humans initiating it, but rather dogs just becoming our camp followers. But you're suggesting, you used the phrase that we took the cats, that they probably weren't the initiator, that we were probably the initiator, that some prehistoric person came across kittens and fell in love with them.
Many prehistoric persons, I suspect. And I mean, there are reasons, with a dog, for example, the weakness in the argument that dogs became camp followers is that, we're talking about a period of time when the entire human population of the globe probably numbered less than 1 million people. We were very small communities, very widely dispersed. And when you look at the surviving hunter-gatherer communities, they don't have a lot of waste. They don't throw stuff away. They use everything. So it's not like there's vast mounds of refuse that's going to.
So you're not even a fan of that explanation for the dog?
Never been a fan of that explanation, no. I think people wanted the animals for their own benefit.
Frank Mendel.
I would just like to raise the issue, having seen it just recently. Wild foxes are remarkably affectionate. People, and these are animals in the Arctic. Don't get to see a lot of people. I mean, very, very low density. And these animals, people go there to study other animals, bears or something, and they're parked sitting down watching another animal, and foxes just come to them and come and go as they please. And foxes are not.
What you're suggesting is it's a possible model for a past event that's going on. We have a natural experiment is going on in our culture with an increasing number of exotic animals being taken in as pets, and so we can watch this process, if we wish, with different species going on right now. I have my eye on the clock and I want to stay on schedule, but I wanted to ask one last question. Did I hear you correctly, all of you, that there are approximately 70 million pet cats in the United States and approximately 70 million stray cats in the United States? Is that what I heard? Did I hear?
That's what I found. It's an estimate. Whether it's real or not, we really can't get a handle on it.
Yeah, I'm going to address that.
Okay, so good. Well, then that's a great segue. And so now we are actually right on schedule. So we're going to take a 10-minute break. And you see I'm being a strict timekeeper. Please be back in your seats at 11 o'clock.